Foundations of Western Political Thought. Module 12, The Hero in History, Thomas Carlyle. In 1840, a shaggy dyspeptic Scotsman delivered 6 lectures in London on the subject of heroes. His audience was fashionable society, lords and ladies, intellectuals and politicians, come to hear the sage of Chelsea pronounce on history's meaning. What they heard was not comfortable. The history of the world is but the biography of great men. Thomas Carlyle told them that democracy was a lie, that equality was nonsense, that the masses were incapable of governing themselves. He told them that history moved through heroes, prophets, poets, priests, men of letters, kings, and that the duty of ordinary people was to find the hero and obey him. Find in any country the ablest man that exists there, raise him to the supreme place and loyally reverence him. You have a perfect government for that country. This was not what Victorian liberals wanted to hear, but they listened, because Carlyle had a power over language that made dissent feel like cowardice, and because somewhere beneath the bombast there were truths they half recognized but preferred not to speak. Carlyle was a prophet, not in the sense of predicting the future, but in the older sense of denouncing the present. He saw industrial capitalism as a catastrophe, democracy as a fraud, and his age as spiritually bankrupt. He raged against the dismal science of economics, against the reduction of human relations to the cash nexus, against a civilization that could produce wealth but not meaning. He was wrong about much, he was offensive about more. But he asked questions that still trouble us. Can democracy produce great leadership? Does equality come at the cost of excellence? Is there something in modern life that makes heroism impossible? We begin with the peasant's son who became the sage of Chelsea, his spiritual crisis, his strange novel, Sartor Resartus, his volcanic history of the French Revolution. Then the lectures on heroes, prophet, poet, priest, king, the great man theory, in full prophetic voice, past and present, and the cash nexus that would echo through Marx. The condition of England and Carlyle's answer, not socialism, but the captain of industry, leadership with obligation, and then the darkening, his worship of force, his views on race that alienated even admirers, the troubling question of where hero worship leads when heroes turn out to be monsters. By the end, you will understand why Carlyle still haunts every argument about leadership, democracy, and whether the people can be trusted to govern themselves. A T-E-P-E-S-A-N, son. Carlyle was born in 1795 in Ecclefechan, a village in the Scottish lowlands. His father was a stonemason, stern and pious, a Calvinist who feared God and respected no man. His mother could barely read, but revered learning. They sacrificed to send their son to Edinburgh University. Carlyle was meant for the ministry, but he lost his faith, not quietly. The loss was agonizing, a spiritual crisis that left him wandering for years. What replaced Christianity was harder to name, a conviction that the universe was meaningful, that there was a moral order behind appearances, that the material world concealed spiritual realities. He called it natural supernaturalism, a religion without dogma, a faith without a church. He married Jane Welsh, a brilliant, sharp-tongued woman who would spend 40 years as his companion, editor, and victim. The marriage was difficult. Carlyle was self-absorbed, demanding, probably impotent. Jane was unhappy, but loyal. Her letters reveal a wit and intelligence that deserved a better outlet than managing her husband's moods. After her death in 1866, Carlyle discovered her diaries and was devastated by the evidence of her suffering. He spent his remaining years in remorse, writing a memoir of her that is one of the most painful documents in Victorian literature. His early career was a struggle. He learned German and introduced British readers to Goethe and the German Romantics, Schiller, Jean-Paul Richter, Novalis. This was significant. German literature and philosophy were little known in Britain. Carlyle opened a window onto a different intellectual world. He wrote a strange, brilliant novel, Sartor Resartus, The Tailor Retailered, published in 1833-34, which presented his philosophy through the fictional papers of a German professor named Diogenes Teufelsd, Duke, God-born devil's dung. The professor expounds a philosophy of clothes, the idea that all human institutions are garments, outward forms that clothe spiritual realities. When the garments wear out, they must be replaced. The French Revolution stripped away the old clothes. What would replace them? Sartor Resartus was unlike anything in English literature. Playful, profound, maddening. It contained Carlyle's spiritual autobiography, the everlasting no of despair, when he rejected the mechanical universe of the utilitarians, the centre of indifference, when he accepted that happiness was not the purpose of life, and the everlasting yea, when he discovered that work, duty, and renunciation of self could provide meaning even without God. Be no longer a chaos, but a world, or even worldkin. Produce. Were it but the pitifulest infinitesimal fraction of a product, produce it, in God's name. 'Tis the utmost thou hast in thee, out with it then. The book found few readers at first, but those who understood it became disciples. It was the gospel of Victorian earnestness, the conviction that life must have purpose, that work must have meaning, that sincerity was the supreme virtue. His breakthrough came with the French Revolution, a history, 1837. The circumstances of its writing became legendary. He had spent years on the manuscript, only to have the first volume accidentally burned by John Stuart Mill's maid. Mill was devastated. Carlyle accepted the disaster with eerie calm and rewrote it from scratch. "Mill, poor fellow, is terribly cut up," he told his wife. "We must endeavour to hide from him how very serious this business is to us." The result was a masterpiece, not a conventional history, but a volcanic prosa poem, a vision of revolutionary chaos that made readers feel they were watching Paris burn. Carlyle did not analyze the revolution. He recreated it. His prose, surges and crashes, mimicking the mob, the tumbrils, the guillotine. He invented a new kind of historical writing, present tense, overwhelming. To describe this siege of the Bastille perhaps transcends the talent of mortals. The Bastille is besieged. The book made the revolution immediate in a way no previous historian had achieved. But it was also a warning. Carlyle saw the revolution as what happens when a society loses its spiritual foundations, when the old beliefs die and nothing replaces them, when the cash nexus dissolves all other bonds. France had been ruled by shams, a decadent aristocracy, a corrupt church, a bankrupt crown. When the shams collapsed, chaos followed. The revolution was not, for Carlyle, a triumph of liberty. It was a judgment, divine punishment for a society built on lies. And it was a prophecy of what awaited any nation that followed the same path. After that, he was famous. The lectures on heroes in 1840 cemented his reputation. He became the sage of Chelsea, consulted by statesmen, revered by the young. Emerson visited from America. Dickens sought his approval. Tennyson, Ruskin, and Froude became disciples. He was the voice of Victorian prophecy, uncomfortable, uncompromising, impossible to ignore. On heroes and hero worship. So the lectures were published as On Heroes, Hero, Worship, and the Heroic in History, 1841. They present Carlyle's theory of history through 6 types of hero: the hero as divinity, Odin; the hero as prophet, Muhammad; the hero as poet, Dante, Shakespeare; the hero as priest, Luther, Knox; the hero as man of letters, Johnson, Rousseau, Burns; and the hero as king, Cromwell, Napoleon. The progression is significant. Carlyle traces the hero from religious origins to secular culmination. In primitive times, the hero was worshipped as a god. Odin was a real man, Carlyle believed, whose greatness was translated into myth. As society developed, the hero appeared as prophet, bringing divine truth to humanity. Muhammad was not a fraud, but a genuine seer, however imperfectly we might judge his message. The hero as poet, Dante, Shakespeare, speaks truths that cannot be spoken in prose. Poetry is not ornament, but revelation. Shakespeare has become the chief of all poets. Whoever learns English, find in him the best wisdom that any European has to give. The hero as priest, Luther, Knox, reforms corrupted institutions in the name of spiritual truth. Luther's "No, I cannot" at the Diet of Worms, his refusal to recant despite pressure from Pope and Emperor, exemplifies the heroic stance. Conscience against the world. The hero as man of letters, Johnson, Rousseau, Burns, is the modern form of the prophet, speaking to an age that no longer believes in prophets. The writer shapes opinion, and opinion shapes the world. Literature is our parliament tool. Printing, which comes necessarily out of writing, I say often, is equivalent to democracy. Finally, the hero as King, Cromwell, Napoleon exercises direct political power. Carlyle's treatment of Cromwell is revealing. The conventional view was that Cromwell was a hypocrite, using religion to cloak ambition. Carlyle insisted he was sincere, a genuine Puritan who believed he was doing God's work. The regicide and the dictatorship were not crimes, but necessities. The theory is simple. History is made by great individuals who see further, feel deeper, and act more decisively than ordinary mortals. They are not products of their time. Their time is a product of them. Without Muhammad, no Islam. Without Luther, no Reformation. Without Napoleon, a different Europe. No great man lives in vain. The history of the world is but the biography of great men. The hero is not merely talented. He has what Carlyle called sincerity, an alignment of inner conviction with outer action, a refusal to live by lies. The hero sees through the shams and conventions that blind ordinary people. He speaks truth that others dare not speak. He acts on convictions that others only profess. Hero worship for Carlyle is not servility, but recognition. When we honor the hero, we honor what is best in humanity. We acknowledge that some individuals are genuinely superior, not by birth or wealth, but by spiritual depth and practical capacity. The refusal to recognize superiority is the democratic lie, the pretense that all people are equal when they manifestly are not. Democracy means despair of finding any heroes to govern you, and contented putting up with the want of them. This is Carlyle at his most provocative. Democracy, he argues, is what you settle for when you have given up hope of genuine leadership. It is not a positive ideal, but confession of failure, an admission that we cannot identify the best and must therefore let everyone have a say, which means in practice that mediocrity rules. Past and present. In 1843, Carlyle published Past and Present, a work that contrasted medieval society with industrial England. The past he invoked was the 12th-century Abbey of Bury St. Edmunds, governed by the capable abbot Samson. The present was the England of the hungry 40s, unemployment, poverty, the workhouse, the bitter fruits of industrialization. The contrast was not nostalgic. Carlyle did not want to restore feudalism, but he used a medieval example to show what his age had lost. Organic community, meaningful work, a sense that labor had dignity beyond its cash value. We have profoundly forgotten everywhere that cash payment is not the sole relation of human beings. The modern world, Carlyle argued, had reduced all human relations to market transactions. The worker sold his labor. The employer bought it. Neither owed the other anything beyond the wage. This was the cash nexus, a phrase Marx and Engels would borrow for the Communist Manifesto. It dissolved the bonds of loyalty, duty, and mutual obligation that had held society together. The result was not freedom, but chaos. The worker, nominally free, was actually helpless, subject to market forces he could not control, discarded when no longer useful, left to starve in the name of economic liberty. The employer, nominally responsible only to shareholders, could wash his hands of consequences. It is not to die, or even to die of hunger, that makes a man wretched, Carlyle wrote, but it is to live miserable we know not why, to work sore and yet gain nothing, to be heart-worn, weary, yet isolated, unrelated, girt in with a cold universal laissez-faire. Carlyle's solution was not socialism, which he despised as another form of materialism. It was leadership, captains of industry, who would govern their enterprises not for profit alone, but for the welfare of all who worked in them. The factory should become a community, the employer a feudal lord with obligations as well as rights. This was paternalism, frankly acknowledged. The leaders of industry, if industry is ever to be led, are virtually the captains of the world. The condition of England. Carlyle was not alone in his critique. The condition of England question preoccupied many Victorian thinkers. Dickens portrayed it in fiction. Engels documented it in the condition of the working class in England. Parliamentary commissions investigated factories, mines, and workhouses. The evidence was damning. What distinguished Carlyle was his diagnosis. Others saw economic problems requiring economic solutions, higher wages, shorter hours, better housing. Carlyle saw spiritual sickness requiring spiritual remedies. The problem was not that workers were poor. It was that work had become meaningless, that society had lost its sense of purpose, that no one believed in anything higher than profit. Men cannot live isolated. We are all bound together for mutual good, or else for mutual misery, as living nerves in the same body. This organic vision of society, the social body, the interdependence of all members, connected Carlyle to Burke and the conservative tradition. And like Burke, he rejected the liberal idea of society as a contract among individuals pursuing their separate interests. Society was prior to individuals. It formed them, gave them identity, bound them in obligations they had not chosen. But where Burke was temperamentally cautious, Carlyle was explosive. He did not defend tradition. He attacked the present. He did not counsel gradual reform. He demanded transformation. He was a conservative in his diagnosis, but a radical in his rhetoric. The worship of force. As Carlyle aged, his views darkened. The failure of 1848, the year of revolutions that changed nothing, confirmed his contempt for democracy. The Irish famine, which he blamed partly on Irish character, revealed an ugly streak of ethnic prejudice. His support for Governor Eyre, who brutally suppressed a rebellion in Jamaica in 1865, alienated many former admirers. Most troubling were his views on race and slavery in an infamous 1849 essay, Occasional Discourse on the Negro Question. Carlyle defended slavery in the Caribbean, arguing that black people were naturally suited to labor under white supervision. The essay was vile and was recognized as such even by Victorian standards. Mill wrote a powerful rebuttal. Carlyle's worship of heroes shaded into worship of force. If great men made history, and if the masses were incapable of self-governance, then what restrained the hero from using any means necessary? Carlyle admired Cromwell, who had killed a king and ruled as dictator. He admired Frederick the Great, who had waged aggressive wars. He seemed to admire strength for its own sake, regardless of the ends it served. This is the dark side of great man theory. If history is made by heroes, and if we can identify heroes only by their success, then success becomes the criterion of virtue. The winner is right because he won. Power justifies itself. Carlyle never quite said this. He always insisted that the true hero was sincere, that he served a higher purpose, that his authority was spiritual, not merely physical. But the distinction was hard to maintain. How do we know the hero is sincere and not merely successful? How do we distinguish the prophet from the tyrant before history renders its verdict? What Carlyle got right. Carlyle saw what the political economists missed, that human beings need more than wages, that work must have meaning, that a society bound only by cash will not hold. He saw that democracy has a tendency toward mediocrity, that the need to appeal to majorities can produce leaders who reflect popular prejudices rather than challenge them. This insight would be developed by Tocqueville, Mill, and the elite theorist. He saw that industrial capitalism, for all its productive power, was creating a new kind of misery, not the poverty of scarcity, but the poverty of meaninglessness. Workers were better fed than medieval peasants, but more alienated. This theme would echo through Marx, Durkheim, and Weber. He saw that history is not an impersonal process, but the work of individuals who seize moments and shape events. This corrects the opposite error, the determinism that treats historical actors as mere puppets of economic forces or world spirits. And he wrote with a force and fury that no other Victorian could match. His prose is excessive, sometimes absurd, but never bland. He made his readers feel the urgency of questions they preferred to ignore. What Carlyle got wrong, but Carlyle's errors were grave, and they were not incidental. His great man theory is bad history. Individuals matter, but they operate within constraints, economic, social, technological, cultural, that shape what is possible. Napoleon was a great general, but he did not create the French Revolution or the armies it mobilized. Heroes are as much products of their times as makers of them. His contempt for democracy proved prophetic of worse things. The 20th century would produce leaders who claimed to be heroes, who demanded worship, who exercised power without restraint. Carlyle did not cause fascism, but his rhetoric anticipated it. The National Socialists, Nazis, admired him. His views on race were stark. In his 1849 essay, Occasional Discourse on the Negro Question, he defended West Indian slavery and argued that black people were suited by nature to labor under white supervision. Mill wrote a rebuttal. The debate crystallized a fundamental disagreement about human equality that continues today. not about whether different peoples have different histories and circumstances, but about whether those differences are natural and permanent, or historical and changeable. His solution, the captain of industry, the benevolent dictator, the hero who leads because he is best, has no mechanism for identifying the genuine article or removing the fraud. Every tyrant claims to be a hero. Carlyle offers no criterion for distinguishing them except success, which is no criterion at all. And his contempt for ordinary people, the masses, the mob, the 27 millions, mostly fools, is not just undemocratic but inhuman. Most people are not fools. They have knowledge of their own circumstances that no hero, however great, can possess. The case for democracy is not that the people are wise, but that no one else is wiser about their own lives. Carlyle's influence. Despite or because of his extremism, Carlyle's influence was enormous. On the left, Marx and Engels borrowed his phrase, the cash nexus, and his analysis of industrial alienation. Carlyle saw the problem. They proposed a different solution. His critique of political economy as the dismal science, a phrase he coined, entered common usage. On the right, his hero worship and his contempt for democracy fed into authoritarian movements. Nietzsche admired him, though with reservations. The National Socialists claimed him, though they had to ignore his philo-Semitism. He admired Disraeli and had close Jewish friends, even as he held harsh views about blacks and the Irish that were common in his era. In literature, his influence on Victorian prose was incalculable. Dickens absorbed his social conscience. Ruskin developed his critique of industrial capitalism. Matthew Arnold wrestled with his religious crisis. Even those who rejected his conclusions were shaped by his questions. In America, Emerson and the Transcendentalists found in Carlyle a kindred spirit, another seeker who had lost conventional faith but retained conviction that the universe was meaningful. Whitman's celebration of great individuals owed something to Carlyle. And the great man theory, however crude in Carlyle's hands, posed a genuine problem for historical method. If history is made by impersonal forces, economics, demography, technology, then what role do individuals play? The debate continues. Biographers assume that individuals matter. Social historians emphasize structures and trends. Carlyle's error was to eliminate the tension by making the hero everything, but the opposite error, making the hero nothing, is equally distorting. How to recognize Carlyle today? When someone argues that what we need is a strong leader who will cut through the nonsense and get things done, they are expressing Carlyle's faith in the hero. When someone complains that democracy produces only mediocrities, that elections reward those who tell people what they want to hear, they are echoing Carlyle's critique. When someone says that modern work is meaningless, that we have traded purpose for productivity, that something essential has been lost in the pursuit of efficiency, they are raising Carlyle's question. When someone calls for business leaders to consider more than profit, to treat their enterprises as communities with social obligations, they are proposing Carlyle's captain of industry. And when someone worships strength, admires winners, regardless of their means, excuses cruelty in the name of greatness, they are following Carlyle's logic to its dangerous conclusion. Pause and consider. Carlyle forces a question that Democrats prefer to avoid. What if the people are wrong? Not wrong about this policy or that candidate, but systematically wrong, unable to recognize genuine excellence, attracted to demagogues, hostile to truth-tellers. What if democracy really does produce mediocrity? What if the price of equality is the suppression of greatness? These are uncomfortable questions. The democratic response is that even if the people are sometimes wrong, they have the right to be wrong about their own affairs, and that concentrated power is more dangerous than dispersed foolishness. The elite theorists would add that there are no heroes waiting in the wings, only competing elites, some more constrained than others. But Carlyle's question persists. Every time a democracy elects a buffoon, every time popular opinion embraces a lie, every time courage is punished and cowardice rewarded, Carlyle's ghost whispers, "I told you so." The answer cannot be to abandon democracy. The 20th century showed what happens when hero worship is taken seriously, but perhaps the answer includes acknowledging that democracy is a second-best solution, not a celebration of popular wisdom, but a hedge against the greater dangers of concentrated power. That is a more modest defense than Democrats usually offer, but it may be more honest. Next, we examine how organized minorities actually rule, and whether the patterns of elite dominance can be resisted or only redirected. End of Module 12.